There is a particular kind of tiredness that does not show on your face but lives quietly in your chest, the fatigue of always worrying about money, of doubting your own worth, of sentir that the universe listens to everyone except you. Maybe you have done everything they told you to do, worked harder, thought positive, repeated affirmations, tried to trust, and still you go to bed with the same knot of anxiety about the future. If this feels close to your reality, stay with me until the end of this video. And before we go deeper, take a slow breath. Allow yourself to arrive fully in this moment. And if this message resonates, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who also needs a softer way to walk this path toward prosperity. In this journey together, we will explore the quantum path to trade anxiety for prosperity consciousness, not as a distant theory or a beautiful slogan, but as an inner process that unfolds in your nervous system, in the stories you repeat to yourself, and in the energy you carry into every conversation, decision, and relationship. Instead of offering instant miracles or asking you to pretend that your pain does not exist, we will look honestly at the tension you feel when you think about money, at the frustration of trying to manifest and seeing little change, and at the silent fear of never breaking free from the same emotional cycles. Step by step, I will guide you to understand why your mind gets trapped in survival mode, how your body becomes addicted to states of fear and scarcity, and how you can gently educate your whole system to experience safety, clarity, and alignment with abundance. This is not about perfection or spiritual pressure. It is an invitation to remember that you are not broken, that your connection with the universe can be restored, and that prosperity is, above all, a state of consciousness that begins inside you long before it aparece do lado de fora. For many people, the desire for prosperity is born inside a body that is already exhausted. Anxiety about money and the future stops being a passing emotion and becomes a constant background frequency, a low, persistent hum of something will go wrong that colors decisions and plans. With time, this state feels so familiar that it starts to be confused with personality, as if being anxious were a fixed identity rather than a conditioned survival response. From a neurospiritual perspective, that survival response is not a metaphor. It is a measurable state. As Dr. Joe Dispenza and other pioneers in spiritual neuroscience describe, the brain does not clearly distinguish between a real, immediate threat and a vivid rehearsal of danger. Every time you imagine losing your job, being humiliated, or failing again, the brain fires many of the same networks it would use during an actual crisis. Stress hormones are released, your heart rhythm becomes irregular, your muscles tighten in small, almost invisible ways. Repetition turns this reaction into a baseline. The nervous system learns anxiety like a language and begins to speak it fluently, even on days when external circumstances would allow for rest. Inside that internal climate, prosperity consciousness can feel almost insulting, as if someone were asking you to paint a sunrise on a wall that is still on fire. When the nervous system is locked in survival mode, it is not wired for expansion, creativity, or trust in the unknown. It is wired to scan for danger, minimize loss, and hold on to the familiar. Quantum manifestation, however, is built on the ability to relax into the unknown and inhabit possibilities that cannot be controlled in advance. Here arises the central conflict. The conscious mind declares that it wants abundance, while the emotional body clings to anything that feels predictable, even if predictable means living in scarcity, self-sabotage, or chronic under-earning. This inner contradiction creates a deep vibrational dissonance. On the surface, you may visualize a prosperous life or repeat affirmations, but underneath, there is a subtle fear of what abundance might demand of you. If you earn more, will you be judged or abandoned? If you finally succeed, will you have to face envy, responsibility, or the terror of losing everything again? The subconscious stores these questions as quiet programs running in the background. Whenever an opportunity appears, old associations wake up, whispering caution, doubt, or shame. The result is a strange dance of approaching and withdrawing, wanting and resisting, asking and at the same time secretly sabotaging the answer. Recognizing this paradox is the first step on the quantum path. Prosperity consciousness is not about forcing yourself to think positive while ignoring your wounds. It is about seeing that the part of you that fears abundance is not evil or inferior, but wounded and overprotective. At some point it learned that safety was found in smallness, invisibility, and low expectations. To move into a new reality, you are not called to declare war on this defensive self, but to bring it into awareness, where it can finally be seen and gently educated. Awareness functions like light entering a room that stayed locked for years. It does not rearrange the furniture instantly, but it reveals where everything has been placed. As you begin to witness your anxiety instead of obeying it blindly, something subtle starts to shift. You notice that the familiar rush of panic before checking your balance is not a prophecy, but a conditioned reaction. You notice that the heaviness in your chest when you think about charging what your work is worth belongs not to the present moment, but to an old memory of being told you were too much for wanting more. Each moment of noticing creates a tiny interruption in the automatic loop that kept survival in charge of your choices. In the language of neuroscience, you are offering new neural pathways. In the language of spirituality, you are tuning into a new frequency. At first, this shift does not look like a dramatic financial breakthrough. It appears as small, almost ordinary changes, taking one slower breath before reacting, being able to talk about money without collapsing into shame, allowing yourself to imagine a future that is not a duplicate of your past. These moments are micro-signals to your body that the present is safer than your history suggested. Every time your nervous system experiences a little safety in a new context, it becomes less attached to its old map of reality. In quantum terms, you stop feeding the probability field of scarcity with constant emotional rehearsals of disaster and begin to energize, even timidly, the field of possibility. Gradually, prosperity stops being a distant rescue mission and begins to feel like a quality of presence you can access before numbers change. Prosperity consciousness is not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear be the only narrator of your story. Another inner voice emerges, quieter but steadier, that remembers your resilience, honors your efforts, and recognizes your capacity to learn and adapt. From this emerging place, the quantum path is built moment by moment in the way you inhabit your inner world. As you learn to stay with your emotions without collapsing into them, you stop negotiating your worth with crises and start relating to money, time, and opportunity from a more stable center. The universe, or what many call the quantum field, does not respond to isolated wishes, but to the consistent tone of your being. When that tone gradually shifts from chronic defense to grounded openness, life begins to offer reflections that are compatible with that new state, and what once felt impossible starts to look simply unfamiliar and therefore available. There is a moment on this journey where the individual begins to sense that anxiety is not only an emotional pattern, but a full-body memory that has shaped their worldview for years. At this point, the question is no longer why life feels heavy, but how the internal landscape became so conditioned to fear that abundance appears as a distant horizon rather than an accessible experience. This chapter explores the deeper mechanics behind that conditioning and reveals how the subconscious mind, paired with the body's emotional memory, constructs the invisible framework through which prosperity is allowed or denied. Every human being grows inside an environment where emotions, reactions, and stories are transmitted long before language develops. The nervous system learns through repetition and intensity, meaning that if someone grows in a household where money represented conflict, scarcity, or pressure, the body encodes these experiences as truth. Even decades later, long after circumstances have changed, the body may continue to respond as if those old conditions were still present. This is why the adult who consciously desires abundance may still feel fear when receiving an opportunity, guilt when earning more, or shame when standing out. The physical memory of scarcity interrupts the logical understanding of prosperity, creating an internal split between desire and expectation. Quantum principles describe this split as a misalignment between intention and vibration. While intention exists in the conscious mind, vibration is rooted in emotion, and emotion is shaped by the stories the subconscious repeats without interruption. That internal repetition creates what many spiritual teachers describe as a personal field, a predictable pattern of energy that broadcasts a certain signal into the world. When that signal is dominated by anxiety, the individual unconsciously scans for confirmation of danger, scarcity, or loss, reinforcing the same emotional state that generated the expectation. This loop feels mechanical, Because in many ways it is. The subconscious operates like an automatic program, reproducing the familiar even when the familiar is harmful. To move toward prosperity consciousness, the individual begins not by forcing new thoughts, but by gently recognizing the emotional habits that have shaped their identity. It becomes clear that anxiety is not simply a response to life's challenges, but a lens through which every experience has been filtered. A job opportunity is perceived as a chance to fail rather than succeed. A financial increase feels temporary or unsafe. Even moments of good fortune are received with suspicion, as if waiting for the real outcome to reveal itself. Prosperity cannot flourish in this climate because prosperity requires an inner posture of openness, trust, and emotional availability. Gradually, the work becomes one of observing how often the mind rehearses catastrophe. These mental rehearsals are not abstract. They produce real chemical signals that reinforce the body's attachment to fear. In this state, the body becomes the authority that dictates how reality is interpreted. A slight fluctuation in the bank account triggers a cascade of old emotions. A delay in a message becomes proof of rejection. A small challenge transforms into a sign of impending failure. The nervous system is not trying to sabotage the individual. It is simply defaulting to the map of reality it learned early in life. Prosperity consciousness emerges when the individual begins to draw a new map from within. As awareness increases, a subtle shift occurs. The individual realizes that prosperity is not only a matter of income, possessions, or achievement, but a state of inner coherence where desire and expectation move in the same direction. When desire says, "I want abundance," and expectation whispers, "I will lose it," the universe responds to the louder internal frequency, which is always emotion. The quantum field, as many spiritual frameworks describe it, mirrors the emotional signature one carries, not the temporary affirmations spoken from a place of fear. In this stage, the process of transformation becomes less about external pursuit and more about internal reorganization. The individual begins to dismantle beliefs that once felt like universal truths. Ideas such as, "I must struggle to earn," "people like me cannot prosper," or "good things never last," start to lose authority as the person witnesses evidence of their emotional origins rather than their factual reality. This recognition is liberating because it reveals that many limitations were inherited, not chosen. Once the emotional charge behind these beliefs starts to weaken, space opens for a new internal experience: neutrality. Neutrality is often misunderstood as indifference, but spiritually and neurologically, it is the ground from which new possibilities can emerge. When the nervous system is neutral, it is not predicting disaster, nor is it forcing optimism. It is present. In presence, the individual can meet life without rehearsed fear, allowing subtle opportunities, intuitive insights, and aligned decisions to arise naturally. This is the point where prosperity consciousness becomes tangible. Not because money suddenly appears, but because the individual is no longer operating under the heavy influence of past conditioning. Choices become clearer, boundaries become healthier, and relationships become more harmonious. The person stops chasing opportunities from a place of desperation and begins receiving them from a place of inner stability. The world outside appears to soften, not because it has changed, but because the inner narrator has changed. Prosperity then becomes a lived experience, rather than a distant aspiration. It is the ability to feel worthy without external validation, to navigate uncertainty without collapsing into fear, and to trust that the universe responds not to panic, but to presence. This chapter forms the foundation for the deeper evolution that follows, a transition from surviving life to consciously creating it, from reacting to circumstances to defining them through an inner state that aligns vibrationally with abundance. There comes a stage in this transformation where the individual realizes that inner coherence is not a philosophical concept, but a physiological alignment capable of reshaping perception, behavior, and energetic presence. Coherence begins when thought, emotion, and intention stop contradicting one another and start moving toward a unified internal direction. This shift is subtle at first, almost imperceptible, because for a long time the nervous system has been trained to operate under the fragmented signals of fear, urgency, and hypervigilance. Yet the moment coherence begins to form, the inner landscape reorganizes itself, with a clarity that feels foreign but deeply familiar, like remembering a language once spoken fluently in childhood. In the teachings of spiritual neuroscience, emotional coherence is often described as the bridge between the human self and the quantum field of possibilities. When a person dwells in anxiety, the heart and brain fall out of rhythm. The heart sends signals of threat. The breath becomes shallow and the mind produces rapid looping narratives that thicken the illusion of danger. This internal dissonance blocks the individual from accessing higher cognitive functions such as creativity, intuition, and holistic problem-solving. Prosperity requires these functions not because abundance is purely mental, but because every opportunity is first recognized, interpreted, and acted upon through the lens of perception. A distorted lens cannot perceive accurately. A coherent one can. As coherence begins to replace reactivity, something transformational happens. The individual no longer takes emotional storms as objective truth. A moment of fear does not automatically become a prediction. A moment of doubt does not turn into a verdict. The person starts to sense that emotions are experiences passing through the nervous system, rather than authoritative messages about the future. This realization loosens the grip of scarcity consciousness, not through force but through maturity. When emotions lose their absolute authority, the individual becomes capable of choosing responses that align with prosperity rather than survival. This internal maturity deepens further when the person learns to generate elevated emotions independent of external circumstances. Gratitude, for example, is not merely a psychological strategy. It is an energetic signature that signals to the brain and body that the environment is safe enough to relax into possibility. When gratitude arises authentically, the heart rhythm becomes more coherent. The breath slows, and the mind accesses a broader range of interpretations. In this state, instead of seeing challenges as confirmation of scarcity, the individual begins to perceive them as transitional spaces, bridges that lead from one level of consciousness to another. The more often this state is accessed, the more familiar it becomes. Emotional coherence, like any learned skill, strengthens through repetition. At first, elevated emotions may feel fleeting, overshadowed by old patterns of anxiety and doubt. But with time, the nervous system begins to prefer this calmer, more expansive rhythm. The individual stops waiting for the world to produce safety and starts generating safety internally. This is the foundation of prosperity consciousness, the ability to feel grounded even when outcomes are uncertain, stable even when circumstances fluctuate, and worthy even when external validation is absent. In this emerging coherence, the external world starts to appear different, not because circumstances magically transform, but because the individual interprets them through a more empowered lens. Opportunities that once seemed intimidating now feel approachable. Difficult conversations that once triggered avoidance now feel navigable. Financial decisions once clouded by fear now become clearer, guided by inner clarity rather than panic. The universe seems to open in small but meaningful ways, offering synchronicities, insights, connections, and pathways that align with the new internal state. This is why many spiritual frameworks emphasize that the quantum field responds not to desire alone, but to the emotional quality behind the desire. When the emotional signature is anxiety, the quantum field reflects uncertainty, delay, or fragmentation. When the emotional signature becomes coherent, rooted in gratitude, presence, and trust, the field reflects opportunities that match this new vibration. Prosperity, then, becomes less tied to luck and more to resonance. A person resonates with abundance when they can hold a steady inner frequency that welcomes abundance without collapsing into fear. Yet this chapter would not be complete without acknowledging that coherence also brings old patterns into the light. As the nervous system stabilizes, buried beliefs, outdated fears, and unprocessed memories may arise, not as setbacks, but as invitations to refine the internal state. This is part of the transformation. Coherence reveals what does not belong to prosperity consciousness. Instead of being overwhelmed by these resurfacing patterns, the individual notices them with increasing neutrality. They no longer become a reason to abandon the process. They become evidence that the process is working. Ultimately, emotional coherence creates a foundation sturdy enough to support the next level of personal evolution. Prosperity stops being a fragile dream, threatened by every obstacle, and becomes a grounded sense of direction, a way of moving through life with intention and integrity. The individual realizes they are no longer trying to escape anxiety, but expanding beyond it. The old identity built on fear, scarcity, and survival begins to dissolve, making room for a self that can engage with the world confidently and creatively. In this sense, coherence is not merely a state to achieve, it is a homecoming. It is the rediscovery of an internal harmony that allows the individual to meet life with steadiness rather than urgency, with clarity rather than confusion, with openness rather than contraction. Prosperity consciousness takes root here, in the calm rhythm of a heart that no longer fights the future, and a mind that no longer searches compulsively for danger. It grows where internal chaos once lived, transforming the inner world into fertile ground for new realities to emerge. There is a turning point in this journey, when inner awareness begins to merge with outward expression, creating a subtle yet powerful shift in the way a person moves through the world. Until now, much of the transformation has occurred internally, in the nervous system, in the subconscious mind, and in the emotional landscape that shapes perception. But prosperity consciousness cannot remain only an inner experience. Sooner or later, it must translate into choices, postures, and behaviors that reflect the new internal state. This integration is delicate because the individual is still learning to trust the unfamiliar rhythms of abundance, while old patterns attempt to pull them back into familiar cycles of fear. Yet it is precisely in this fragile threshold between the old and the new that the most profound growth occurs. When someone begins shifting from anxiety to prosperity consciousness, the first external sign is often a change in the way they relate to time. Anxiety compresses time, making every decision feel urgent and every problem feel like a crisis. A person trapped in survival mode looks at the future through the lens of threat, assuming that anything unknown is dangerous and anything delayed is a sign of failure. Prosperity consciousness dissolves this compression, allowing time to expand. Choices no longer feel like traps but contemplative spaces. The future becomes a canvas rather than a battlefield. This expansion does not arise from passivity, but from trust. Trust in one's capacity to navigate challenges, trust in the intelligence of life, and trust in the unfolding of processes that cannot be controlled. As time expands internally, creativity begins to return. Anxiety narrows vision to what might go wrong. Prosperity consciousness widens vision to what is possible. The individual starts noticing pathways they had overlooked, resources they had ignored, talents they had undervalued. Opportunities that once appeared too risky now feel aligned with a deeper, intuitive knowing. Instead of chasing outcomes with desperation, the person moves with intention and clarity, choosing actions that reinforce their sense of worth rather than betray it. This is not impulsive confidence, but embodied certainty, the kind that emerges only when the nervous system becomes familiar with emotional safety. Another significant transformation emerges in relationships. When living in states of scarcity, a person often tolerates imbalances, overgiving to avoid rejection, undercharging to avoid conflict, staying silent to avoid discomfort. Prosperity consciousness changes these dynamics. As inner worth solidifies, external agreements shift naturally. The individual no longer apologizes for taking up space. They no longer negotiate their value through self-sacrifice. Instead, they begin to cultivate relationships, personal, professional, and financial, that honor mutual respect and energetic balance. This shift may feel uncomfortable at first because it disrupts long-standing patterns, but it is essential for grounding abundance in the physical world. One of the profound realizations at this stage is that prosperity does not flourish in environments that drain emotional, mental, or spiritual energy. Prosperity requires spaciousness. It requires inner alignment. It requires environments that support expansion rather than contraction. As the individual's consciousness evolves, they become more discerning. They sense immediately when an invitation, partnership, or opportunity resonates with abundance or echoes scarcity. This discernment is not intellectual, it is somatic. The body recognizes the truth before the mind constructs a narrative around it. This heightened sensitivity allows the individual to make choices that conserve energy and direct attention toward paths aligned with long-term growth. The quantum aspect of this transformation becomes increasingly clear. Life begins reflecting the individual's internal state with more precision. When the person approaches the world with a sense of grounded worth, opportunities arise that require exactly that level of confidence. When they hold emotional coherence, conversations unfold with synchronicity. When they trust their intuition, the next step reveals itself at the right time. None of these shifts are random. They are responses to a new frequency the individual is broadcasting, one of stability, openness, and readiness. Yet integration is not without challenge. As the individual steps into this expanded version of themselves, old patterns may attempt a final resurgence. Doubt appears in whispers, memories reenact emotionally charged scenes, and fear tries to reframe progress as danger. This is an expected part of the process. The nervous system, though learning a new way of being, occasionally seeks the familiarity of its old programming. Instead of viewing these moments as failures, the individual begins to interpret them as evidence of transformation. The presence of old patterns does not negate progress. It reveals the layers still dissolving. As this chapter reaches its culmination, the person finds themselves standing on a new kind of internal ground. Prosperity consciousness no longer feels like an abstract idea or a distant spiritual teaching. It feels lived through breath, through presence, through decision-making. Anxiety may still visit, but it no longer dictates identity or behavior. It becomes a signal rather than a command. The individual has developed the capacity to pause, reflect, and respond rather than react. This is the essence of the quantum path, not the elimination of uncertainty, but the ability to meet uncertainty with a state of being strong enough to shape experience rather than collapse beneath it. The bridge between inner transformation and outer reality becomes visible. Prosperity moves from imagination to embodiment, from longing to lived experience, from theory to practice. And as this integration deepens, the path forward becomes increasingly illuminated, not by force but by coherence, alignment, and the quiet authority of a person who has learned to trust their inner world as the foundation for creating their outer one. There is a profound moment in every transformation where the individual finally recognizes that prosperity is not something they chase across the landscape of their life, but something they cultivate within the quiet corridors of their own consciousness. Throughout this journey, the thread that connects every insight, every shift, and every awakening is the understanding that anxiety is not a permanent identity, nor is scarcity a destiny written in stone. These states are learned patterns, encoded through years of emotional repetition, and once they are seen with clarity, they begin to loosen their hold. Prosperity consciousness emerges not from force or willpower, but from a gradual, genuine reorganization of the inner world. It arises when the heart learns safety, when the mind learns spaciousness, and when the body remembers how to trust its own rhythm. It is in this convergence of awareness, emotion, and intention that a person discovers their ability to influence the quantum field, not through desperation, but through coherence. As the individual deepens this inner alignment, life responds with an elegance that once seemed impossible. Opportunities that previously felt out of reach begin to take shape, not because the external world suddenly transformed, but because the person is finally able to see, hold, and step into them. Prosperity becomes a relationship with existence itself, a dialogue between the inner state and the unfolding of circumstances. This journey reveals that abundance is not measured by accumulation alone, but by the ability to remain grounded, open, and connected in the face of uncertainty. It is about meeting life not as an adversary, but as a collaborator. And as this collaboration strengthens, the individual realizes that the path ahead is not determined by fear, but carved by consciousness. Prosperity, then, stops being a future outcome and becomes a way of being, calm, intentional, expansive, dignified. When a person arrives at this understanding, the world around them does not merely change. It becomes a mirror reflecting who they have become. The inner shift is the true victory. Everything else is a natural consequence of a consciousness that finally recognizes its own creative power. If you could release every inherited belief of scarcity and step fully into a consciousness that magnetizes abundance with ease, how different would your life look 1 year from today? This question is not theoretical. It is an invitation to recognize that your inner world is already shaping your future, moment by moment. The only real choice is whether that future will be built from fear or from alignment. If this message resonated with you, if you felt even a small shift in your awareness while listening, then allow this journey to continue. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next step of this transformation, and join a community that is awakening together. And before you go, continue watching the video that's appearing now on your screen. It was chosen specifically to support your next breakthrough and deepen everything you activated here today.